guys. So we're kind of losing the light here, so I'm going to try to get through this quickly so that we still can see all the books. But here is the part 2 to my bookshelf tour series. We've already gone through this bookshelf over to the left, and now we're just going to go through this one to the right. This one is not quite as organized as the first one, but all the books are on there, so I can always kind of tweak as we go. But anyways, let's just get started. Like I said in the previous video, these are the Billy bookshelves, and the shelves I have here are kind of my display shelves. So when visitors come over, these are what they see the most of. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started onto this second bookshelf. So here is the top shelf. I am standing somewhat precariously on a chair, but yeah, this is the very top shelf. And so let's just get right to them. So first up here on the left is this, I think the classic cloth-bound edition of Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre is one of my favorite books. It is definitely one of my favorite classics of all time. I read this back in high school. It wasn't actually an assigned reading. I just thought the book sounded good and something that would be up my alley. And I was right. I really identified with the main character in this book. There are a lot of lines that just really spoke to me. And the sort of moody atmosphere of the story is really my kind. So yeah, I would say if you're a shy, introverted person, I think you would identify well with Jane Eyre. It's been a while since I first read it, and I'd love to give it a reread. But yeah, this is one of the few classics that I actually collect multiple editions of. So this is just one of them. I have a few others scattered around my other bookshelves. We'll see them later. In the same classic Penguin cloth-bound editions, we have A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. This is the second classic that I collect because it is also one of my all-time favorites. I actually read this book for the first time as a sophomore in high school, and it ruined me. So much of the characters in this book helped define my taste in characters and reading. In particular, Sydney Carton, if you've read this story before. As soon as I met Sydney Carton, I was like, oh, I understand. This is what I look for now in characters, this personality type. And that has remained true to today. So this was really a defining story for me. It does have a lot of description, but if you dig through that and get to the meat of the characters, it's so good. I've reread it, I think, twice, but honestly, it's a painful reread. Just due to the ending. But there's so many quotes in this book that tear my heart apart. So yeah, this is the other classic that I collect. Both of these mean the world to me. These are my two favorite classics of all time. If I had to add one, it'd be A Separate Piece by John Knowles, but they don't really make these editions for that story. So for now, it's just Jane Eyre and A Tale of Two Cities. Very important to creating the reader that I am today. Next up, we have this fantasy duology. These are very short novels, basically novellas really, because they're just so short. But this is actually an incredible fantasy duology. It's by Emily Tesh. Not only are the covers really pretty, but the story itself is really good too. There's queer characters in this story, and just the atmosphere is incredible, and I love Emily Tesch's writing. It's blurbed by Naomi Novik, so if that tells you anything. But yeah, this is Silver in the Wood and Drowned Country. If you're looking for something good but short, I am someone who often struggles with short stories, but I loved this. So next up we have a book that I have not read yet, but sounds very up my style. It's called The Thorns Remain by Ja Harwood. It says on the front, "A fey lord, a mortal woman, a dance with a terrible price." And then next up we have The Lights of Prague by Nicole Jarvis. I've had this book for a long time, and I really want to read it because it's very gothic fantasy, and that is just my niche genre, my subgenre. So I don't know why I keep putting this off. This little quote says, "Transports readers to a historical Prague where evil lurks." Say no more. The next book is The Summer Tree by Guy Gavriel Kay. He is a very well-known fantasy author. I love this cover. It's so pretty. It's interesting. I actually got this book in a blind date with a book, I think is what they're called. It's all covered, and then you just go off what is written on the outside. And I was really scared that I was going to get something I'd either already read or wasn't interested in, but this is so up my alley. This is perfect. And I really want to read something by this author, so I've had this again for a couple years. I really need to get to it. I actually just got one of this author's newer books, so it's time to read this so I can get to the newer book. This is another book that I got from a blind date with a book. I think I got them both at the same time. And this is called Archivist Wasp by Nicole Cornerstace. Hopefully I said that right. I've never heard of this book before, but I remember it's post-apocalyptic. I believe it has fantasy elements, and it sounded really good. Trust me, if I had gotten one that I wasn't interested in, I would have gotten rid of it, but both of these sounded so good. So yeah, I got both of these from a small little independent bookstore in New York, so they're also sort of reminders of that. But this next book is The Wolf in the Whale by Jordana Max Brodsky. I believe is how you say that. And I believe this is a Norse fantasy. It's pretty chunky. It has deckled edges, which are my absolute favorite. But yeah, I'm very interested in sort of Norse and Celtic inspired fantasy, and I was going through one of those phases when I bought this. I'm still really interested in it. I just haven't read it yet. Next up is a adult fantasy duology, starting with, I believe this is the first book, The Tethered Mage, and then The Defiant Heir by Melissa Caruso. I think there's a third book. I think this is actually a trilogy that I just have not gotten the third book for because I haven't read the first two, so I felt kind of guilty. Read these two, then get the third book. But I just saw these at the bookstore a lot, and they sounded really good, so that's why I picked them up. And these covers too, right? They're so pretty. Next is The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. This is a very well-known fantasy book. The little blurb says, "Even on the throne, you're only as good as your wits or your heart." I know Catherine Addison has written quite a few books now. I think this is the start. I can't remember if this is the first in a series or if this is a standalone, but I know this book by Catherine is very well known. So this next book is Strange Beasts of China by Yan Ge, or Yan Ge. I need to check that pronunciation. The blurb at the bottom says, "By far my favorite fantasy book of the year." And that's by Sylvia Marina Garcia, who is also a well-known author. I just remember it's a short book, but I remember hearing such good things about it. It says, "In the city of Yang'an, an amateur cryptozoologist is commissioned to uncover the stories of its fabled beasts." This next book is Of Roses and Rituals by S.L. Prater. Not sure how to pronounce that last name. It says A Witch's Ever After. I got this book from a book box years ago. I can't remember which one it was. But again, another short book. I believe it's obviously fairy tale inspired. Really, if you have like a Beauty and the Beast-esque tilt to your story, I am interested. Beauty and the Beast has always been my favorite animated Disney film, so. And next up is The Demon King, which is the first book in the Seven Realms series. This is by Cinda Williams-Chima. This is a very beloved series from back like when I was reading like young adult, like back in the day. I believe this was around in the 2000s, maybe? Early 2010s? Let me see. Check. 2009, yeah. So when this first book came out, and it's a fairly long series. I've heard amazing things about it. I just had never had time to get to it. It was one of those fantasy books that I'd always look at the bookstore, but be like, oh, I have too many other books to read. But I picked up this paperback a little while ago because I had heard other people talk about it, saying that they love that series still, even as they grew into adulthood. So I have the first book. I'm refusing to buy the others until I read this first book because it's a longer series and there's no way I'm buying them without at least starting the series. And then next up is Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. You probably have heard of this book and Brandon Sanderson. This is I think it says Mistborn, but I think this is technically called The Final Empire, and it's the Mistborn series. I don't know why they changed that for the cover, but I have only read this first book. I really enjoyed it. I think I gave it 4 stars, 3.75, probably 4 stars. It was really good. There were aspects I didn't like about our main character, Vin, and like the sort of romantic connection that was being developed with a certain other character that's introduced later on in the story. But the other narrator of the story, Kelsier, I love him. He is one of my favorite. I love that character. I just have not continued on because there's an event that happened in this book that made me kind of question if I wanted to continue reading, but I did really like it. The magic system is really good. I did like Vin, our main character, and I loved Kelsier. Like, Kelsier is such a cool character. But yeah. This is the only, I think, Cosmere universe, well, aside from the standalone, this is the only Cosmere book part of a series that I've read, and I did like it. Maybe one day I will return. Next up is A Matter of Magic by Patricia C. Reed. I believe this is a bind-up of 2 books. I could be wrong. Yeah, I'm not sure, but I loved this book. I read it forever ago, and I remember such a good time. I had such a good time reading it. It's like a Regency-inspired fantasy, which is one of my favorites. There is a romantic aspect, but it's very like a side romantic plot, and that is obviously the best kind of romantic plot. So yeah, I remember loving this book, and I want to reread it at some point. So highly recommend giving it a shot because I don't see people talking about it ever, and it deserves love. It's really good. The next book is A Skin Full of Shadows by Frances Hardinge. I think that's how you say that name. I believe this author is pretty prolific. I believe they've written quite a lot. And honestly, this cover is what really drew me in. It's so pretty. It's very much giving animal fantasy, which is one of my favorite subgenres of fantasy. I just love this cover. This is the UK cover, and I had to get it. It also has green sprayed pages, which are really pretty. Yeah. The next book is Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reed. I'm sure you've heard of Ava Reed. She has written quite a lot of fantasy. I believe this is a fantasy horror novel. This is the UK cover, and I'm very interested. It's a shorter book, but I'm not a big horror reader, but I love when there's bits of horror in other genres, like fantasy and even romance. Like, I like when there's just like a horror undertone. So hopefully I will like this. Next up, we have the first two books in the Gentleman Bastard series by Scott Lynch. We have The Lies of Locke Lamora and Red Seas Under Red Skies. These are the original hardcovers. I do have the third book, but I have it in like the UK or the US version. They're different sizes is all I know. So these two are the same size, but the third one is like giant and tall. You'll see it later. But yeah, I've heard a lot of people say this is similar to Six of Crows, but like the adult version. I don't know when the fourth book is going to come out. I remember it was rumored to come out like last year or a few years ago, and then it got pushed back. So we'll see how that works. But yeah, I love these covers, and I need to read them. This next book was a whimsy order from Waterstones, which I try not to do, but at this point I was weak. It was a couple years ago. It's called, I can't really see the title in the camera, but it's called The Animals at Lockwood Manor by Jane Healy. Hopefully you can see that there. Yeah, this is the Waterstone signed edition. It has really beautiful stenciled edges. And again, you can probably guess why I bought this. Animal fantasy. I don't even know if it's actually fantasy, but I just saw this cover and I was like, I must have it. And it's definitely historical. It's set in 1939. It says part love story, part mystery. A gripping and atmospheric tale of family madness, long-buried secrets, and hidden desires. And lastly on the shelf, we have this, I believe it's a duology, An Unkindness of Magicians and A Sleight of Shadows by Kat Howard. I know this book came out long before the sequel did. I think this was a standalone for a little while, but these covers are so pretty, and I love how they're sort of inverse colors. It's just so stunning. I believe this is sort of a contemporary fantasy. I could be wrong. But yeah, I'm absolutely in love with these covers. They're so pretty. And that was it for this shelf. Now moving on to the second shelf. You can see this one's a little haphazard. There's like some random space there, and they're not all like, I don't know. This one will need some rearranging, but for now, let's just get started. So I will not be tapping on these because these are my Subterranean Press editions of R.F. Kuang's fantasy novels. These were expensive and they're pretty rare, so I just don't want to cause them any damage. They're made with very high quality grade paper, and yeah, I just don't want to do anything to mess them up. So I will show you them though. We have the Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. We have the Dragon Republic and the Burning God, which are the three books in the Poppy War trilogy by R.F. Kuang. And then over here on the right, we have Babel by R.F. Kuang. I love that cover with the characters. I think that art is just so stunning. So yeah, these have art on the inside, and yeah, again, the paper is just really thick and nice. So these are sort of prized possessions for me, and I try to keep them as safe from sunlight and everything as possible. They're probably some of the nicest books that I own, so yeah, very excited that I have these. Moving on, we have A River Enchanted and A Fire Endless by Rebecca Ross. These are Rebecca Ross's adult fantasy books. This is a duology, and these are the Illumicrate editions. So they have, I can show you real quick. They have stenciled edges. I'm not in love with the design on the edges, but these covers are really pretty. So I have not read this series yet, but I've heard only really good things, so Next up, we have two books that just seemed really similar, so I stuck them together. They're also similar heights, so that really helped. We have The Sisters of the Winterwood by Rena Rossner and The Sisters Grimm by Minna van Praag. Hopefully I said that right. On the left, we have this Goldsboro edition of this book. It's what has yellow sprayed pages. And on the right, The Sisters Grimm. This is I think an old Illumicrate edition, either Illumicrate or Fairy Loot. I can't quite remember, but it has black sprayed pages. Yeah, I think just because the titles both had sisters in them, I was like, well, these would have belonged together. I have not read either of them yet. And then next up we have Threadneedle and Shadow Stitch by Carrie Thomas. On the left, this is the Waterstones edition, and the right, this is the Goldsboro edition. I had decided not to get the Goldsboro edition of the first book, even though I did have time to buy it, and I kind of regretted it. So when I saw this one was still available, I was like, well, just get the second book. But like, they're so pretty. There we go. The first edition, the first book also has sort of a cityscape on the edges. But again, yeah, I forgot to go for it, and now I'm paying the price, but these are still really pretty books, so I don't know what the series is about. I've just heard good things, and that's all I really needed. Next up, we have these two editions of Starling House by Alex E. Haro. I have quite a few Alex E. Haro books. I think you've already seen like 2 other books that I have from her. This one sounds very much up my style. I love the birds on the covers. They're actually on the covers of both of them. There's really pretty art. I cannot for the life of me remember what editions these are. I believe one is Owlcrate and one is Illumicrate, but I could be wrong. But yeah, this is a fairly short book. Again, I should be able to get through it quickly. Up next, we have The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. This book is so beautiful. I've heard really good things about it. I've heard it's more divisive, like either you like the sort of flowery prose or you don't. But I think I'll like it from what I've heard other people say. It's not that long, and I believe it's a standalone, so. Next up we have is it called the Godkiller Chronicles? I can't quite remember. But this is by Hannah Rayner, I believe is how you say that. The reason I have 2 editions is because I love the jacket of this book and the sprayed pages, but I also love the art and the sprayed edges of this book. So I can't bring myself to part with either. It's really annoying. I have not read this series yet, so hopefully once I read it, I can maybe decide which one I want to keep. To the right here is Sunbringer. This is the second book in the series. These 2 are Illumicrate editions, and this is the Waterstones. I did pre-order the Illumicrate edition of the 3rd book. It's actually coming out, I think, really soon. So can't wait for that to get here. But I did not pre-order the Waterstones edition, so you would be proud of me, hopefully. But yeah, obviously have not read this series yet. Next up is The Emperor and the Endless Palace by Justinian Huang. This book is so gorgeous, and I've heard of really, really good things about it. Like, my bookstore always has a blurb out for it saying how much they loved it. I believe it's also queer, a fantasy. So yeah, I am very excited to read this. There's so many times when I've almost picked this up, but then again, like, I'm in the middle of another book. There's always an impediment. It's really annoying. Finally, second to last, we have I believe it's the Barnes & Noble Deluxe Edition of The Will of the Many. It might not be Barnes & Noble. It might just be a deluxe edition. Yeah, this is Hierarchy Book 1. This is by James. Is it Islington or Islington? I can never tell. But it has yellow sprayed pages. If you recall, I have the original cover that it came out with. And the reason I have both still is because I don't know what the sequel cover is going to look like. So I don't know which one to keep. But yeah, I've heard such fantastic things about this book, like incredible things. So I am really excited to get to it. And I believe the second book comes out later this year. So that's very exciting. Lastly, this doesn't really go here, but it fits and there's no other spot for it, so there it goes. This is the deluxe edition of The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This is the first book in the Folk of the Air series. I'm sure you've heard of it. It blew up on TikTok years ago, so yeah, it has this really beautiful slipcase. Here is what the book itself looks like. It has sort of a shiny material embossed that shows a bug, a bird, a raven, a tree. It's really pretty. Obviously the crown on the back, very important. It has black sprayed pages, really pretty in-paper art. And interestingly, this came out years ago, and we just thought it was a one and done, but then, is it Barnes & Noble? I can't remember. The publisher released that they're coming out with a similar edition for The Wicked King, which is the second book in the series. So I guess they'll do the whole trilogy, and maybe even like the extended books. So guess I'll have to get that. Now we are on to our third shelf down. I can finally sit, which is very nice. But let's just get started. So first off, we have The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie O. This is a fantasy featuring a retelling of a Korean myth. I don't usually like books set underwater, but this one I've heard really good things about, and this cover is just so pretty. Sprayed edges. Again, this is the Fairy Loot edition. Sorry if you heard that car. And then there's art on the end papers. Yeah, just really exciting. And this author, Axie O, is coming out with a new series this year, and I've seen the cover and I'm just so excited for it. I just feel like it's going to be really good, so I need to read this to catch up with her backlist. Next up we have Shanghai Immortal by A.Y. Chow. Hopefully I said that right. This is a stunning book. I believe this is the Goldsboro edition? No, I think it's a book box, maybe a Lumicrate. Fairy Loot. So this is the Fairy Loot edition. It's blurbed by Tasha Suri, which says a lot. I've heard nothing but incredible things about Tasha Suri, so I am really excited to get to this. The book itself is stunning. The art on the inside, also really pretty. And the sequel, I believe, comes out this year, and I did pre-order it. Look, sometimes I just have a gut feeling and I have to follow it. Next up we have The Daughter of the Moon Goddess and the sequel Heart of the Sun Warrior by Su Lin Tan. I've heard kind of divided things about this duology. I feel like it's, again, one of those that either you like it or you don't. It's interesting. The people I follow and like whose reviews I respect, have similar to me, are kind of divided on this one. So I'm very curious if I'm going to like it or not. But it sounds really good, and I did get the Waterstones editions, which are these. And then I did end up getting the Fairy Loot editions of these just because they're so pretty. So again, we have sort of a different colorway for them. So this is Daughter of the Moon Goddess. You can see these stenciled pages. They're really, really stunning and similar to Heart of the Sun Warrior. I just loved both colorways, so I ended up getting both. And this last book is actually a collection of short stories set in the world of this duology. And so I picked that up from Fairy Loot as well. Next up is a book that I hauled recently. This is also by Su Lin Tan. It's called Immortal. This was the January book for Fairy Loot, I believe. Again, really stunning stenciled edges. I don't know if it's set in the same world as that duology or if it's separate, but it's just so pretty. Next up, these should be familiar because I just read these recently. We have the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. I gave all three of these books 5 stars. It's an incredible series. I Cannot recommend it enough. N.K. Jemisin just can do no wrong. I've read a duology from her, the Dreamblood duology, and I also gave those 5 stars. Just an incredible author. You will be so hooked on these characters, you will not know what to do with yourself. And so they came in this box set from the publisher with art from the books. It's crazy because now I know who these characters are. This is an adult fantasy slash somewhat sci-fi. I don't know exactly which one you categorize it as, but these are all collector's editions that are signed by N.K. Jemisin, so cannot recommend enough. This series will stay with me. Next up we have the Litjoy editions of the Folk of the Air series. These editions really capture the vibe of the series, and they have annotations, which is pretty cool. Next up we have the Litjoy editions of the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy by Laini Taylor. I read these for the first time, I think last year. Time goes by so fast now. Either last year or the year before. And I'd always pass them up. I remember being like a kid and seeing them on the bookshelf and thinking that they didn't really look like they were for me. I didn't really like the American covers for them, but I'd read Strange the Dreamer later on and I loved that duology. So I decided to give these a try, and I actually really liked it. Laini Taylor just has great commentary in her fantasy novels, and they're always so unique. So I did splurge for this special edition trilogy set. And then lastly on this shelf, we have For the Wolf and For the Throne by Hannah Whitten. These editions are so gorgeous. That's really the reason I got them. I have read this duology, and I think I gave it 3 stars, 3.5 stars maybe. It was atmospheric, like it checked all the boxes aesthetic-wise, but the story itself was the execution was a little weak, I would say. But I loved the vibes so much that I was like, you know what, I'll get rid of my paperbacks and I'll just buy this really pretty deluxe set. It's very much like a Red Riding Hood slash Hades and Persephone retelling. So really those elements are what saved it for me. So yes, that was that shelf. Moving down, we have a bit of a glare because I have a lot of Goldsboro books here. But this is the 4th shelf. So they don't all fit on this shelf, so you'll have to forgive me. But this is the Shadows and Crowns series, starting with The Song of the Marked, A Twist of the Blade, The Call of the Void, A Crown of the Gods, and The Queen of the Dawn, all by S.M. Gaither. This set is from Goldsboro. It's funny, I didn't really know what the series was about. I'd never heard of it, but then I got an email saying, like, if you want access to the rest of the series, you have to buy the first book, and that made me panic, and I bought it. I knew it was fantasy, and it looked good, so I was like, you know what, I'll just take a gamble, I guess. I did not know until later that this is like sort of a romantasy series. It was from Goldsboro, and they don't tend to do a ton of romantasy, so I just figured it was fantasy. But you know what? If Goldsboro does a romantasy, if they choose to like do special editions of a romantasy, I kind of feel more inclined to trust them. Like if they think that it was that good to do, then you know what? I'll give it a read. So yeah, that's what this series is, and they all have really pretty sprayed pages, all a different color. So I'm kind of really excited to just have this whole series to binge. It's always kind of exciting. These are also Goldsboro books. This is a series starting with The North Wind and The West Wind by Alexandria Warwick. Again, I believe this is also a sort of romance fantasy. I know there's nuance between romantasy and romance fantasy, so I just kind of use the term that I feel fits best. But at the top left, it says, a mortal woman, an ageless god, a union that will save the world or destroy it. Yeah, these covers were just too pretty for me to pass up. It definitely kind of had my vibe. And they also have really pretty stenciled pages. So yeah, I did splurge on this set. I don't know if there's going to be more books in the series or not, so I guess we'll see. Next up, we have the broken binding editions of the Prince of Thorns trilogy. I don't think that's what it's called, but I'm blanking on what the series is called. The reason I'm showing you the spines first is because they all create a image on the bottom, which I always love when publishers or book boxes do that. I think it's really cool. These are the really stunning covers. I think these are the original UK covers, but I could be wrong. It's the 10th anniversary edition, yeah. And they all have really cool sprayed edges. I'm trying to remember if I think they're all the same. Nope, I think they're actually a little different. Yeah, they're all very similar except for the color grading. So yeah, that's pretty cool. This is a very, very, very dark, grimdark fantasy series. Don't pick these up if you don't feel comfortable reading about like rape, gore, blood, like all the trigger warnings. So just, yeah, you should definitely know that before you pick these up. I don't usually like to read about gore, but I make exceptions when the story is interesting enough, and I feel like that will be the case with this series. But yeah, definitely an adult grimdark fantasy series, so just know that going in. And yeah, it's by Mark Lawrence. Just to go on a little side tangent here, thinking about like grimdark fantasy got me thinking about this, but the way I feel about sort of controversial topics or books, just because of like the degree of triggers or, you know, like certain content, the way I kind of view it all is like, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. And that's not just for like grimdark, it's also for like dark romance, or like not even genres I read. I don't really read dark romance, but like, instead of complaining about what other people are reading, if it's not for you or you don't like the content, then just don't read it. Like, why would you waste your time complaining about what other people are reading if you can just choose not to read it and go about your life? I don't know. And again, this doesn't just apply to like things that I like, even genres that I don't read. I'm not gonna like bash people for reading because they can read what they want, and if they can tolerate whatever the topic is, or they like feel like they get something from reading about it, then I'm not going to question it. Obviously there are lines to this way of thinking, but just like as in general, in terms of genre content, it's kind of how I feel. Next up, this is the Skyward series by Brandon Sanderson. I much preferred the UK covers, so that is why I got these books. We have Skyward, Starsight, and Cytonic. I think I might be missing a book or like a collection of short stories that also takes place in this world, so I doubt that the hardcover is available anymore, but maybe I'll find it secondhand. But yeah, I really love the UK covers. I just think they're really pretty. This is a sci-fi, I believe it's young adult actually, series by Brandon Sanderson. This really interests me. Again, I'm not really a sci-fi person by nature, but I have been trying to read more. And I feel like since I'm familiar with Brandon Sanderson's writing, that might be like a good gateway into reading more sci-fi. So yeah, I just need to track down that last book or collection of short stories, and this will be complete, hopefully. Next up, we have The Book Eaters by Sunyi Dean. This is the Illumicrate edition. I remember I wasn't originally interested in this premise because books that are about books are very hit or miss with me. Sometimes I find them boring for some reason, but other times I really like them. It's very, again, like a 50-50 shot for me. But I'd heard really amazing things about this book, and I just remember there was some reviewer I read that kind of got me reinterested in it, so I decided to keep it. So yeah, it's a very short book too, so I do want to get to it. And lastly on the shelf we have the illustrated editions of, I believe this is the Farseer trilogy. the first trilogy in the Realm of the Elderlings. Again, these are the illustrated editions. I think they're really pretty. I have the paperback of Assassin's Apprentice. I think it's like Juniper Books has a special edition of this series as well, but I didn't like the color scheme as much. I much prefer these illustrated editions, so hopefully they'll keep coming out with these, even though they're huge, so I'll have to dedicate like an entire shelf or two to the finished series, but for now I am collecting them because they're really pretty. Again, the Farseer trilogy, actually just the Realm of the Elderlings in general, is one that I'm very excited to get to. It's a little scary, but I know I'm going to love it because not only does Peru's Project love that series, but a lot of other people I respect love that series too. I've kind of just been putting it off because I'm not ready to be sucked into like a void of obsession. But it'll happen, don't worry, it'll happen one day. Okay, now we're on to the second last shelf. Actually, the last shelf is not books per se, so this is the last books shelf. But stay tuned to see what the last shelf has on it. Starting out, we have Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This is one of his secret projects. I believe it was the first one. It's sort of a loose retelling of The Princess and the Bride. I believe he wrote it for his wife, which is really cute. And I really enjoyed this. It was a standalone, so that's why I read it so quickly, because I was like, I miss his writing, but I didn't want to jump into any of his series. So yeah, this was good. I think I gave it like a 4-star or a 3.75. It was very enjoyable and I would reread it. And then next up we have Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. This one is set in the Cosmere universe, and I loved this book. I loved this book. I know a lot of people said this was like his like version of like a romance in a fantasy sort of setting, and I loved it so much. It was so good. Don't take that to think it's like a romantasy, because it's not. It just features more focus on like a romantic pairing than I think his usual work does, and I loved it. I loved it so much. This I gave like at least 4.5 stars, maybe 4. Well, it could be like 4.25, 4.5 stars. I really liked it. I would recommend it to anyone. I think anyone would love this book. It's so good. It's about two characters who accidentally keep like body hopping into each other's lives. It's just so good. Like, oh, I would reread this one in a heartbeat. It was so good. And like I promised, here is the third book in the Gentleman Bastard series. It's called The Republic of Thieves by Scott Lynch, and if you remember, this is a lot bigger than the other two books. I found this in the Strand in New York, so that's why I got it. And I didn't have the other two on me, and I just kind of assumed they'd be the same size, and then when I got home I was like, oh, this is not in the same set I see. But yeah, for now I don't really care. I'll just keep this third one down here. Next up is The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reed. You will have seen this, the Illumicrate edition, in my previous bookshelf tour. The reason I have this other copy is because this was Ava Reed's debut, if I'm not wrong. And I did pre-order a copy that was personalized to me, just because like I loved the title and I thought I'd really like it. Still have not read it. Again, we'll see. Once I read it, I'll pick which one I want to keep. It'll probably be the Illumicrate edition, but if I just absolutely loved it, I might end up with 2 copies, which, c'est la vie. Next up, we have Ledge, Chasm, and Valley by Stacey McEwen. I did not know this, but I think this author was like a TikTok author, but I've heard really good things about this trilogy. Yeah, it's called the Galatian trilogy. I just know it's set like in a sort of northern atmosphere. I think it has a bit of a thriller vibe to it as well. I could be wrong. But yeah, I love these covers, and I am excited to read this series. This last book is actually a Litjoy edition. I didn't know they were doing special editions, but when I got a notification that this one went on sale, the last one, I was like, well, might as well get a pretty edition. So yeah. Next up is The 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Harrow. This is the first Alex E. Harrow book I ever bought, and it is the Fox and Wit edition. It's really pretty deckled sprayed pages with sprayed edges. this is the one I kind of want to read first before I get to any of her others, since it is the first one. Or I believe it's her first book, I could be wrong. But yeah, need to get to this. Next up, you'll see the Just Grave Empire by Richard Swan. I just hauled this. This is the Goldsboro edition. This book has been getting rave reviews on my timeline. Like, just like already people saying that it's their favorite book of the year. Yeah, so I'm so excited to get to this. I need to read his original trilogy first, but as soon as I do, I will be diving straight into this book. If you noticed I skipped a book, it's because it's one I had already moved around, so you've already seen it in my previous bookshelf tour, so just ignore that. But this is Deathless by Catherine M. Valente. I also hauled this recently. Beautiful art by After Blossom on the cover. I believe this is the Fairy Loot edition. I've read this years ago when I was in college. This is sort of a vague retelling of a Russian folklore of Koshchei the Deathless. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but hopefully someone can correct me if I'm not. But I loved this story so much. It's very dark and kind of unexpected, just like a dark fairy tale is vaguely what it reads like, and it's so good. Highly recommend. Also got really stunning sprayed pages. Yeah, I love this book. I'd love to reread it because it's been years since I first read it. You'll be noticing a lot of books I've recently hauled here just because I didn't have space for them anywhere else, so they've all kind of gone here. So you'll see a lot of familiar faces. This is The Scorpion and the Night Blossom by Emily Wynne Zhao. This is her recent first book in a new series, I believe. She's written quite a few fantasies before, and I've read one of her trilogies and I really loved it. This is the Fairy Loot edition with sprayed pages. So yeah, I already know I like her writing, so I'm excited to catch up and get to her new release. Again, here is The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick. This is the latest series that Broken Binding is doing for their fantasy subscription. I just joined, and this is the first series. I really didn't have any interest in this series beforehand, and then when Broken Binding showed this beautiful cover and I kind of looked more into the synopsis, the more it sounded like it would be a fantasy that's more my style. So yeah, I'm really excited to read this trilogy. The first book is the only one that has arrived so far, but the other two are coming in the upcoming months. I apologize if the lighting is a little worse now. The sun's gone down, so I'm just gonna have to work with what I've got. But the next book is To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods by Molly X. Chang. I'm very excited for this book. I've had it for a while. The sequel comes out later this year. I just know it's sort of like I know this is an overused phrase or an overused sort of trope, but enemies to lovers, except for this is like fantasy and like actual enemies to lovers. So yeah, really excited for this book. And this is I believe the Fairy Loot edition, or maybe the Illumicrate. Really pretty. Next up is The Teller of Small Fortunes by Julie Long. This is the Fairy Loot book edition, so it has a different cover and very beautiful stenciled edges. I've heard really good things about this book, especially like as a cozy fantasy, and I do enjoy a good cozy fantasy, so excited to read this. Next up is The Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdullah. This is a special edition from, I believe, Illumicrate. It has a different color change on the front cover and purple lilac sprayed pages. I'm very excited for this book. I have not read it yet, but the sequel was just put on sale by Illumicrate, and so I ordered it. So that is a sign that I need to get to it soon. Next up, we have The City of Stardust by Georgia Summers. This cover is absolutely beautiful. I'm so in love with it, and I love the sort of foiling on the title of the book. I just love landscape art, so whenever there's a cover with landscapes on it, or cityscapes, I just think it's so beautiful. This was definitely a book box edition. I don't know if it's a standalone or a series, but I do want to get to it soon. Next up, we have the Fairy Loot edition of The Gods Below by Andrea Stewart. It has a snake on the cover. Andrea Stewart is the author of The Bone Shard's Daughter, I believe. That's a trilogy that I own but have not read yet, and I believe this is the first in her new series. Up next, we have Portrait of a Thief by Grace D. Lee. This is the Illumicrate edition, and I believe this follows a heist. I don't think this is fantasy, but I love this bold cover. There's just something about it that really draws the eye, and I love that the hand is stealing the A. Like, I just think that's genius. It has bright yellow sprayed pages. I love a heist story, so I am really excited to get to this. Next up, we have another cozy, I think cozy fantasy is where this book falls under. It's called The God and the Gumiho. Hopefully that's how you pronounce it, by Sophie Kim. This is about a like trickster fox spirit and a, I think, outlawed god who goes to her coffee shop, something like that. This is definitely a book box edition, and I'm just really excited to read this one. And the sequel comes out this year, so that's exciting. And lastly, for this shelf, we have The Drowned Woods by Emily Lloyd Jones. This author has written young adult fantasy before, and I believe this is her adult debut. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this cover is just so gorgeous. I think she usually writes fantasy with, at least I think her first couple books had Welsh folklore in it, which is really cool. I don't know what this one is about, but it looks really stunning. And it has sprayed edges as well. And that was it for that shelf. Okay, and then last up on the bottom shelf is my TXT shelf. So if you didn't know, I am an avid TXT fan. I'm a MOA. If you don't know who TXT is, it stands for Tomorrow by Together. It is a Korean band, K-pop group. It consists of 5 members. We have Subin, who is the leader. We have Yeonjun. We have Bomgyu. We have Taeyeon, and we have Hyuningkai. And I love them to death. I found them back in 2020. I think it was like March or April of 2020. And I immediately fell in love with their music. Their music is just very unique to me for K-pop. They have a very nostalgic vibe to all of their songs, and that just really speaks to me. The 5 of them, you can just tell, are very close. They've even said they're like closer than family. They've lived together for so long. And again, there's only 5 of them, so that kind of creates very like family-like close-knit group. And I just love all of their 5 voices. You can obviously watch like their videos on YouTube, and it's very fun to see their like what it's like for their day-to-day lives and like their relationships with one another. So yeah, I highly recommend checking out TXT songs, not to plug them, but yeah, this is my shrine to them nonetheless. So we'll just start here at the very left. We have their debut album, Star, and then we have their second album, Magic, the Dream Chapter Magic. These are some of their earliest music, and also some of my favorite. It's just so, again, like nostalgia is the word I think of. And then we get into Blue Hour. It's also kind of fun because the members of TXT are a little younger than me. I think the oldest was born in 99. So I just have a lot of love in my heart for them. Like, I just want to see them prosper. And then here is the Chaos Chapter Freeze, which is probably my favorite album of all time. I love all of their albums. Like, if you ask me, they have a no-skip discography. But Freeze really got me. And then this is a VIP lanyard because I went to their Act Lovesick tour and I got VIP. I've seen them, I think, 4 times in concert, I want to say. 4 or 5 times in concert. And I just have the best time every time. If any of y'all have been to a K-pop concert, you know it's not for the weak. You stand outside in the sun for hours. And then once you're, you know, dehydrated and tired, they let you in and you jump up and down and sing and scream for another like 3 hours. So again, not for the weak at all, but I've always had such a blast every time I go. So yeah, we have the Chaos chapter Freeze, we have Fight or Escape, the name chapter Free Fall. Sorry, I'm trying to get my shadow out of it. Minisode 2, Thursday's Child. It's a great album, little mini album. This is a little art print that came with one of their albums. So if you don't know, TXT, their like lore is that they have alternate selves. So Huening Kai is an angel. Bomgyu has spikes on his shoulder. Subin has elf ears. Yeonjun has antlers. And Taehyun has a eye that can see into another world. So yeah, it's just really special. And then there's the star. So if you love like fairy tale and like, it's really a book lover's dream. Like their lore is very like fantasy and I just love it so much. So after Thursday's Child, we have another VIP badge that I got for Act Sweet Mirage. Underneath we have Temptation, which is actually one of their most popular albums. We have Tomorrow, Minisode 3, and then most recently the Star chapter Sanctuary. I also have some of their like Japanese albums and such and such and a lot of their like bonus materials. Like you can buy lots of photo books and stuff, and it gets to be really expensive. I used to collect photo cards and I still do have a binder of those somewhere, but between being a book collector and being a K-pop TXT collector, it got to be way too expensive, so I had to cut back on one thing, and so I cut back on collecting photo cards, but I'm okay with that. I can always get like 1 or 2 off of like Mercari and stuff. And then lastly, I just have this box here that says TXT on it. This is their light stick that you wave at concerts. It's called a Moabong. And yeah, that is my TXT little shrine. I hate that it's on the bottom, but like it kind of doesn't stick out here, which I feel like if I put it on one of these shelves, it would just kind of look random, so. But yeah, that was this whole bookshelf. Appreciate your patience. Hopefully you enjoyed. I'm sorry again that the lighting kind of got worse as the day went on, but hopefully you still enjoyed getting a glimpse of all the shelves. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below, and I will film another one soon. Thank you.